Hey guys, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here. Last week was would have been the 75th birthday of Mikhail Tal, and so I maybe should have presented this game last week, but with Mikhail Tal games it's always the right time to look at one of his masterpieces of tactical wizardry. So this game was played back in '87. It's actually a blitz game, believe it or not, but it's still a really impressive bit of attacking prowess on his part. So he was white. This is played in St. Estoril, sorry. As I said, in 1987. Black was Miguel Quinteros, a well-known Argentinian grandmaster and longtime friend of Bobby Fischer's, the late Bobby Fischer. And, well, let's have a look. So many of you know, of course, that Tal was a great blitz player in addition to being a fine over-the-board player. And in fact, he won the first official World Blitz Championship back in 1988, which is why, or one reason why, the World Blitz Championship, well, the big blitz event, it's usually the World Blitz Championship, that takes place after the Tal Memorial in Moscow in late November, is named for him. So, anyway, let's continue on. So Quinteros played the Pirc against him, a little bit of an unusual variation, and certainly this is, waving the red flag in front of the bull, playing an opening like this against Tal. Alright, so all of this is certainly well-known theory. D5 is one of the two main moves. Of course, D takes C5 is also quite common. So we'll just kind of zip ahead, though. I don't really want to discuss the theory. But in a sense, this game will be of theoretical value in that it's, I think, a marvelous illustration of what White is trying to accomplish with his kingside buildup in the Austrian attack against the Pirc. So F5, by the way, I want to say a little bit about this. Generally, when you've got this kind of pawn structure, you would think, well, the move to play is E5, or at least to shoot for is E5. But there are two things that need to be said about that. One is, of course, that it really weakens the D5 pawn here. So while there are positions where you can absolutely go for that, this one is not really clearly one of them. The second thing is that F5, while it doesn't maybe make the bishop on D3 feel so good about life, it does activate everything else, and it keeps the center relatively stable. It opens the diagonal to H6 for the bishop on C1, and the biggest problem about a move like F5 in general would be the weakening of the E5 square. But here it's really, well, first of all, it's not even that easy for Black to get there. I mean, he could play knight D7 and knight E5, but White could, in theory, just swap. But more to the point, such a knight repositioning would really weaken the kingside further. And Black can't afford to take such liberties. So F5, it's only in the abstract some kind of positional concession. In terms of the position that we've got on the board, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so Quinteros played C4, bishop E2, knight C to E8. Kind of an ugly move, but shoring up the knight on F6 is, I think, a good idea. And we'll see this certainly later on in the game. Bishop H6, queen to B6 check, king H1. Takes, and this is Quinteros' idea, is to activate both knights. So we still got the one knight on F6, the other knight is active. Yeah, his dark squares, the dark squared bishops have been exchanged, but it's not really clear how White could exploit such a factor at this point. Okay, so Tal played H3, and here Quinteros should have played knight to E5. This would definitely have been best, and it'll be very clear soon why this would have been best. But he played knight to E3, and okay, so you could start already to calculate from this position. What should White to move do? And I would definitely recommend taking your time. One of the interesting things is checking all of the analysis with the computer. Tal's intuition is deeper than the computer's ability to calculate, at least at this point. That's pretty impressive. I mean, computers can calculate, obviously, just colossal numbers of positions, and the fact that Tal's intuition here is still so vastly superior to at least the computer that I'm using. So I'm not using my absolutely strongest computer, and maybe the latest and greatest, maybe 8-core machines will have no problem with this position. But at least the computer I was using, it needed to be proved, and it always was. That proved that White was in fantastic shape here. So have a look, see what you can find. Okay, well, the first move that White should play here is queen to H6, and that's what Tal did. Not worrying at all about the rook. So the point of queen h6 is to prevent black from, well, from playing a move like king to g7, or maybe in some cases putting something on h5 to prevent this mating pattern. Now the key thing is to realize what white is up to here. So white wants to play knight to g5 and give mate on h7, and to do that he'll have to get rid of the knight on f6 subsequently, which he'll do with, well, as many sacrifices are needed to get the queen h7 mate trick in. Okay, well let's see what's possible from here. So if knight takes f1, rook takes f1, and here black has quite an array of options. So we'll mention three. So if rook to d8, a little clearance for the king, then fg, knight to d5, threatening rook f6, of course, with the idea queen h7 and then queen f7 mate. So now black can try queen to d4. Okay, how does white make progress from here? See, the point of this is that rook f6, queen f6, and then f7 is covered. Well, it looks like white can win with bishop to g4. So one point of this is that bishop to e6 check is threatened. If the king comes to f8, that rook takes f6 will win, with queen h7 mate coming next. Or after bishop e6, if black takes, then knight takes with a double attack, hitting the queen and threatening queen to g7 mate. So black might as well just swap and now try to react to this knight to e6 idea. And black tries this, or can try this, with the idea that if knight e6, then knight takes g4 counterattacks on the queen, and because the knight's on e6, there's no more queen h7 stuff. But white can finish the job here with this. Knight e2, queen e5, and then knight to f4. And he'll use this knight to stay here to maintain the attacks on h7, and then drop this knight on e6 instead. And this is decisive. White wins here. So back here, rook to d8 is inadequate. Another try is g takes f5, which looks rather a bit too bold, but it's a little bit resilient. Okay, knight to g5 is obvious, and now two possibilities. If queen to e3, here there's, well, let me again invite you to try to figure out how white should proceed from here. There's a fast solution, or apparent solution, and a slower one. And the slower one, on this occasion, turns out to be correct. So the fast solution looks like this. e5. What's the idea of this? Well, if d takes e5, then knight c to e4. If knight takes e4, queen h7 is mate. If black does nothing, then knight f6 followed by queen h7 is mate, and moving the rook doesn't help because then there's queen takes f7 mate. And if pawn takes, then there's rook takes f6. And again, queen h7 mate is in the offing. Alright, so that's the idea. Unfortunately, black has queen takes e5, and after knight c to e4 now, plays f takes e4, and after rook f6, hard luck, bishop to f5, and everything is covered. Darn it. So white is lost here. So instead of e5, white should play rook to f3. And this is good. We're hitting the queen and we're preparing to put the rook on g3. So black should try this check and now play f4. But here, funny enough, white can just play rook to f1. Calm move. And the point is to prepare knight e2. And then knight takes f4. And now knight e6, knight h5, all that happy stuff is coming, and black is completely lost. Okay, back here. If instead of queen to e3, black tries queen to d4, how does white win from this position? So it's one insane tactic after another here. But what makes this more comprehensible is that it's all unified by a certain theme, which is getting rid of that stupid knight on f6. If we can just get rid of that guy, then the world is our oyster. So the right move here is bishop to g4. He can't take with the knight because of mate in 1. If he takes with the pawn, rook f6, and we mate him over on h7. And we're threatening to play bishop takes f5, which will then give us threats with bishop takes h7 check, as well as just playing bishop takes c8 and rook f6 once again. So e6, e takes f5, and now that's a clearance move, so we can play knight c to e4. And on e takes d5, rook to d1, followed by knight takes d5 wins. So, going back, this means that G takes f5 is just not going to cut the mustard. Alright, another try is rook to b7, aiming after an eventual f takes g6 to play f takes g6, push the e pawn, and cover h7 in that way. It's a good idea. Knight to g5, queen to e3. Now what? e5. So here we go. Once again, the clearance move. We attack the knight. We clear e4 for the second knight. Very tough position for black to stay alive in. Maybe black can survive without a complete catastrophe here. Okay, d takes e5 will not survive. Although the move here is not knight c to e4, but d6. This is even a little bit more accurate. Now on e takes d6, white can actually take on g6 and then play knight to d5, taking advantage of a brand new tactical problem, which is that knight takes d5, rook or queen takes f8 is mate. So black has to cough up the queen here, but the bishop on c8 falls, and white will be up a queen for a rook, easily winning position. Okay, another try. e6, but now knight c to e4 is winning. Alright, however, instead of d takes e5, maybe queen takes e5 is not quite the end of the world. So knight c to e4, and here black has two moves that at least avoid an immediate loss. Rook to e8, takes, and now there's no mate. The king can squirrel out to e7. So knight takes h7 is probably best here. And after rook b to e7, bishop g4, followed by f takes g6, bishop h5, and so on. White's got a big advantage, but maybe it's not quite decisive yet. Alright, another try for black is just to give up the queen, and this might be the best option of all. Takes, queen e3, and white is better, but material is roughly balanced. It's white has a queen for a rook, bishop, and a rook, knight, and a pawn. Excuse me, and so black has some hope still. White's clearly for choice, but the game is not over. Okay, so this is about the best that black can do, I think. Really, after playing knight e3 and seeing queen h6. Now, back to this position. We can now see why the move knight to e5 was a big improvement. This cuts out all that e5 and knight c to e4 stuff. The fact that white can take on e5 and double black's pawns just seems absolutely trivial after the variations that we saw and that we're yet to see. So back to the game. After knight to e3, queen h6, here Quinteros played b4. And this looks pretty smart too. He wants to get this knight out of there before e5 and knight to e4 takes place. Okay, so what do you do? My viewers who are prospective Mikhail Tals, how do we continue this attack? So where does the knight retreat to? Does it go to a4, d1? What do we do? Well, in fact, knight to a4 is not a bad move. The queen moves, we take on e3, he takes our knight on a4, and white stands better. But Tal goes for the throat. He's Mikhail Tal, after all. And he plays, and absolutely correctly, knight to g5. Who cares? The knight's hanging, the rook's hanging, none of it matters. All right, let's see the proof of this. All right, so first of all, let's see what happens once again if black takes the rook. So if he takes, well, we calmly recapture, and we know again the threat is f takes g6, rook takes f6, queen h7 mate. If he takes here, once again, e5. If b takes c3, we play e takes f6, threatening mate on h7 and on g7. If he takes here, once again we play knight c to e4. If he takes here, we could play rook takes f6. This is winning also, but black could play this neat little trick, bishop to f5. Now, we'd love to play rook takes f5, except that our queen on h6 would be hanging. So we'd have to capture, and after he takes with the rook, he's at least repelled our attack for the meantime. White is winning still, but it's a little bit more accurate to play d6. Nasty little trick here. If e takes d6, then of course rook f6 is just immediately game over. So queen takes, and the difference here is that now there's no rook to b6. So we grab this pawn, our queen's in the heart of the action, e5 is dropping, c4 is under attack, and white's fantastic here. But both lines were winning for white. So knight takes f1, not going to save black's hide here. Okay, how about taking the knight? This knight has been a real thorn in black's side. Let's try getting rid of it. Okay, f takes g6, and now bishop f5. So that's pretty clever. But white can take this guy and still win. But what does white do here? I mean, it looks like black's got everything covered up pretty good. It's threatening both rooks, and material is actually completely even at the moment. It's not a particularly relevant fact that the material is dead even at the moment, but it's true. All right, so what should be done here by white? Okay, the answer, knight takes h7. Now, the threat is to play knight takes f6 check and queen to h7 mate, so that means, of course, that black cannot take either of the white rooks. Obviously, he can't take the knight either, so f takes g6. And now, all the same, f takes g6, reestablishing mating threats. So if b takes a1 queen, it's not quite the same thing because black can play rook takes, but it's mate in 2. So that does not save black. All right, how about queen to b7? This is kind of clever, so that on knight takes f6 check, there's e takes f6, and the queen defends horizontally. So now what does white do? Okay, the answer, g7. Very, very strong. Now, if black takes the queen, what's the point? What does white do? So you've got all these captures. You could take the queen, you could take the knight, I guess in theory. Well, you could take either knight. You could, of course, take on f8. So many moves to choose from. So many captures to choose from. So there are what? 1, 2, well, at least 3 or 4 plausible captures. And guess what? None of them is correct. The right move is knight to g5. And black is absolutely defenseless against queen to h8 mate. There's no defense. In fact, all black can do is delay it by one move with queen takes f1 check. Sooner or later he's got to do something else. We might as well do this and threaten queen takes g2 mate. And then there that is. So instead of b takes a1 queen, black could try knight takes h7. But now white cashes in at last. Rook f8, takes, rook to b1. And surprisingly enough, I mean, especially after all the bloodshed we've seen, white is the exchange ahead. Doesn't seem possible, but it's true. And white is winning here. Okay, so that means, going back, that b takes c3 is no good either. So Quinteros played bishop takes f5. Makes sense. All right, e takes f5, and now black can choose between b takes c3, which might just transpose to... no, this will be a little bit different than what we saw, I believe. So b takes c3. This loses to fg6, of course, and now, if, for instance, knight e takes d5, how does white win? Well, again, let's just use the same logic that we've been using over and over again. We want to get rid of the knight on f6 so we can play queen takes h7 mate. If there's a knight backing up the knight on f6, well, let's get rid of that guy too instead. Bishop takes c4, cb2, bishop takes d5. All right, so we know what our threat is. But black plays b takes a1 queen, and it looks as if our plan has been thwarted, but it hasn't, because now the bishop turns out to be a useful attacker as well. Bishop f7 check, and whatever black does, it's a quick mate. If king h8, it's very quick. g7 takes care of it. If rook takes f7, then g takes f7 check, king h8, we promote. You can make a rook if you want, be funny. And now, smothered mate. Alright, so that takes care of b takes c3, going back. And instead, Quinteros played knight takes f5. Alright, white to move. By now, I'm sure you guys have the pattern down cold. Alright, well, it's not knight to e4 because the queen is hanging, so you got to play rook takes f5 first. G takes f5. And now what? Well, of course, knight c to e4. And here Quinteros resigned because after f takes e4, which is completely forced, rook f1, and although it's still 2 moves away, there's nothing that black can do really against the threat of rook f6 and queen takes h7 mate. The only thing you can do to really delay this mate by any appreciable length of time is to play queen e3, and then after rook takes f6, play queen takes g5. But obviously this is dead lost. White is up almost a full queen. I mean, well, okay. Black has an exchange in 2 pawns, but for a queen, not really a good deal. So for that reason, Quinteros resigned at this point. So fantastic attack by Tal, but a very consistent one, and one that you guys can certainly use in your own play when you're white against the Pirc in the Austrian attack. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely a really nice, beautiful game, but also a very thematic game, an instructive game. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you can use it, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.